Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Wall, sponsored by Campus Steaks. Check them out downtown on Pew Street. It's a Philly thing. Today, I am joined by NFL agent for Sports Star, Jim Ivler.
Good
Jim,
to be here, Landon.
Thank you so much for coming in.
My
Jim
pleasure.
is a Penn Stater, graduated in 1990, correct?
Correct.
So when did you when were you officially verified by the NFL as an NFL agent?
March of 1993 was when I was originally certified, so I just finished draft number 32.
Wow. So you got right into it right away, huh?
Right into it upon graduation from law school, and started with the idea really the first week of law school. When I was there, they did not have a sports law society. I said, let me start that. And I had a speaker in who was a baseball agent, and it just sort of clicked. The whole time I was at Penn State, I had never given it a thought. Probably at that time didn't even know the profession existed.
Right.
But pretty early on into law school, I realized this could be the path. And so, upon graduating and getting a job as a lawyer, I did practice for 4 years as I started building up my agent practice. So, got certified right after law school.
That's awesome. I feel like a lot of people that I talk to that are sports agent, it's like that was never ever plan A. It always seems to be like that was a plan B, or that kind of just came along out of nowhere.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be plan A because, overall, there's not a lot of agents. In the NFL, for example, there's just under 1,000 agents that are certified, and certainly the majority of them don't have any clients in the NFL. So, it's really like the top 100 agents represent about 75% of the players in the league. So for that to be the plan A, you need a lot of things to fall into place. So, you might want to have something else to fall back on if in case this one doesn't work, no matter what sport it is you end up doing.
Yeah, you definitely got to be a baller to make some real money. How often do you sleep, would you say? Like, is there a time of year where you think you sleep a lot more in the off season?
That's funny. I get asked that often. Do we ever have any downtime? The real answer is no. But if I had to pick a time of year that's a little bit quieter than others, it's the month of August. And really the only reason for that is both our NFL clients and college players who we have begun speaking to already are in training camp. And those, as you know, those are the busiest days that you have, morning till night. And we don't reach out to certainly college players in August. I'd never bother a guy in August. That's time to get focused and get yourself right. And even my own clients, they know where to find me. I don't want to wake them up from a nap in training camp. Sleep is sacred in training camp.
Absolutely.
So if there is a time that's a bit slower, but that maybe last 2 weeks because, we're into preseason games by mid-August. I already have my, doing a little Penn State tour of some of my clients in preseason games this year already. So a little bit of time.
Jim. Well, yeah, that's good. August coming up, so hopefully Jim gets a little couple extra hours of sleep here coming up in August.
A little break.
So obviously you Penn State grad. Do you know how many Penn State guys you've had total?
Oh, God, I don't. I mean,
it's probably a lot.
Dozens. I mean, dozens and dozens over the years, that's for sure. It's always just been so much fun and an honor representing guys from our school, a place that I love so much. And again, if you had told me when I was a student here that I was going to be doing this, I would have laughed. Like I said, I don't know if I would have known it was even a profession back then. But, it's and my non-Penn State clients like to tease me that they know I like my Penn State guys more than them.
Right.
Tell them it's not true, even though it might be.
Yeah, slight favoritism. That's all right. That's all right.
But I still bleed the blue and white. And, big Penn State family. My dad went here, class of 61. And then I met my wife up here. And, she's a graduate. And my brother and my 2 daughters have now graduated. So we're pretty hardcore.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's somewhat of a cult in a good way. It's a special place to be. What's the client that made you the most money? Well, I guess, excuse me, not made you the most, but what client did you have make the most?
I can absolutely answer the question.
I think I know it is.
The answer is Tamba Hali, and because Tamba, up until last year, most people wouldn't have known this, Tamba was the highest earning Penn State player in the history of the NFL, and I say that up until last year because just last year, Allen Robinson, who's not my client, passed Tamba. And in third place is Donovan Smith, who is my client.
That's what I was going to ask. I was like, Donovan's got to be up. You've got him a good amount of. How many contracts has Donovan signed in the NFL?
Donovan's done between his race. So it's been 4 contracts now, 3 with Tampa and then 1 with Kansas City, and has 2 rings protecting 2 of the GOATs.
Yeah, I would say to protect. Oh man, and what's funny about Donovan is how we do the draft. If you ever watch signing day with Penn State, they kind of do a draft style where they put your name on the board. Well, during COVID, I don't know if they still do this, but they had a Penn State letterman announce who the Penn State, who we were drafting in 2021, and Donovan Smith actually called my name. So I was always a big fan of Donovan Smith, and if you watched last week, Mike Poorman had him in his class, and Jim Ivler came and spoke in Mike Portman's class. So there's a lot of connections through all that and through our Penn State players. But one person I did really want to ask you about was John Urschel. And it's someone that I learn a lot about, and they talk about him all the time in our broadcast, in our media classes, all that stuff. I mean, he's a big name, especially with some of the stuff he did with Bill O'Brien at the end. So he, speaks very well. What's your favorite John Urschel story that you have?
So many of them I could tell. John was the year before Donovan. John was drafted in the 2014 draft, and really the biggest part of John's draft process, and I know we'll talk about generic draft process. The thing that was unusual about John's process is that the key, I told him, was to really convince these teams that he loved football and that football was number one, because he was obviously so gifted and did so many unique and really unprecedented things academically, graduating in 3 years, having his master's before the draft, teaching calculus classes here, unusual things. I knew that the threads of questions to him by the teams was going to be, why are you even doing this? You could go make $1 million now for Google or whatever you want. And so that was the big process with John, was really convincing teams. And we went over it, and we did some practice interviews, and we hire outside consultants to come in, former NFL general managers, to help prep all of our clients as they're going through the draft process. But the key thing for John was convincing these guys that he loved football, and he did. He did love football until he decided he loved math just a little bit more.
Yeah. I can't say most people choose math over football, but that's why John Urschel's a special guy. You mentioned how he taught a calculus class, and I think I saw this on a TV feature that he did. But it was Bill O'Brien, and the coaches were in their room, and they were kind of mapping out the class, who has class when are we going to do practice? And they would put, a little green dot next to someone if they didn't have class in this time period, and a red dot if they had class. And John Urschel, I believe he had like a yellow dot next to his name. He said, Coach, what does this yellow dot mean? They said, oh, that means that John Urschel's teaching a class.
He's the professor.
He's a professor here while he plays football. I think he's the only person ever to do that.
Yeah, well, we had a lot of firsts with John. We were chatting before. We do, as you can imagine, a lot of off-the-field marketing deals for our clients. John was the first and still only deal that we ever got with Texas Instrument calculators. So that's, we figured that might be an appropriate partner, and they agreed. And so, yeah, John was unique in so many ways, and what a great guy, and he's doing wonderfully now, and a family man and a professor, and might have married somebody smarter than him, by the way, if you could believe that.
That's impressive.
Yeah, his wife is, she's only a Harvard grad, and she writes for the New Yorker and the Times and other. She's published multiple books. So Louise is pretty special in her own right. So yeah,
that's awesome. Well, athletic and smarts for those kids. I guess they hit the jackpot. One other, you got another lineman from Penn State this year, Caden Wallace. You talked to us about how his draft process went, and I think a lot of fans, and I've talked to Caden, I mean, he was really pleased with how it went, and I was a huge Caden Wallace fan, and talked about how underrated he really was, especially this past season, kind of overshadowed by Olu Fashanu a little bit, but I mean, he was just as locked down on that right side. Can you talk a little bit about his draft process and how that went?
Sure. The process obviously went well. I think everyone would agree Caden got drafted higher than most were expecting. By the time it was draft time,
he even said that. I saw he posted on his story. He said, "Hey man, I wasn't supposed to go this high, but I'm gonna ball out anyways. I'm having a good time."
Well, I certainly told him, the week of the draft, that I felt pretty confident that Friday night was where he was going to go. No guarantees, there never is. It depends upon how things fall and whatnot. But listen, he had a wonderful process. The way I see our role primarily in this process is surrounding our clients with the best resources that we possibly can, from the combine training program and all of the things that surround that, obviously, and then outside consultants and whatnot. And so, we got to take advantage of everything that we can, and information is key in my business. One of the pieces of information that I had was a really great retired offensive line coach out in the Phoenix area. That's where Caden trained for the combine. I connected Caden with this offensive line coach, and they really hit it off, as I knew that they would. But I also knew that this offensive line coach's son was the assistant offensive line coach for the New England Patriots. And so I thought that could be a little connection there, and that he would tell his son about it. And I think that worked out great. But all credit to Caden. He crushed the process. He had a great all-star game. He had a great combine, did well at Pro Day, crushed the interview process. Such a sharp kid from such a wonderful family. And so, yeah, we were all pretty pleased with how that worked out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm on Twitter all the time, and now I'm even on a little bit of Patriots Twitter, just because I love to follow our guys. And it seems like there's a very good possibility that Caden Wallace Wallace could come in and start at right tackle. So I am really excited for him. He is one of my OGs, and he deserves it. So really great guy all around.
I think Caden brings a lot of versatility and can probably play four
Yep.
positions on the offensive line and will be able to plug in a lot of different places. I'm sure he'll settle in somewhere for New England in
Yeah.
due time and whatnot, but that versatility, especially for, well, all positions these days, but for offensive linemen, is really big in the draft analysis
Yeah,
from teams.
that's what I would hear. That's like the number one thing as an offensive lineman. If you are not, an elite left tackle, you need to be able to play guard and tackle or guard and center. So there is that versatility piece that you have to be able to bring to the table. Now I want to go back to Tom Bahali a little bit because I read this story about how you helped get Tom Bahali's mom out of Liberia and over here. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that was something. I mean, really, it starts with immediately upon signing a new client when their college days are done playing football. One of the many things we talk about is, what can we do? How can we help? What kind of stress can we remove? What hassles can we take off your plate so that you can focus on the task at hand, which is trying to crush this postseason process so you can get drafted as high as possible? And Tamba said, well, now that you ask, I don't know if you know the story, and I certainly knew the story. He was from northern New Jersey. Once he came here from Liberia, I'm from northern New Jersey, so I knew about Tamba back in Teaneck High School days. And I certainly knew his mother was overseas, still in Africa, and he hadn't seen her for about a dozen years. What I didn't know is that Penn State had been trying to help him to get her over to this country for quite a while, and for whatever reason, it just hadn't come to fruition. So in that meeting I had with him after the triple overtime Orange Bowl victory against Florida State, he said, "Could you help with this?" And I said, "All right, that's a new one, but yeah, let me sink my teeth into it." And so me and a lot of other people, this was not a solo act, other people within my company, politicians that we got involved. It was a process, but we wanted him focused on the postseason, and he focused real well. He ended up being the 20th pick in the draft that year, and it did take a while, but we actually turned it into an HBO Inside the NFL piece that shows me walking off the plane with her during his rookie year in Kansas City to reunite them. So that was something.
That's fantastic. I'm sure that's, this job is really difficult. And like we said, you don't get a lot of me time. You don't get to sleep a lot. But that type of stuff has to be more rewarding than even anything else with these, signing big contracts. When you get to unite a guy with his mom again, where they, and she can be around him basically 24/7, that has to be so special.
It's those moments where, you can be there when a guy brings a family member, mom, dad, whoever, to their new house that he got for them, or, big family milestones. And look, the reality is we do so many things, and as much of the football aspect that we do, we're spending so much more time just on personal things happening in a player's life, because the role, once a player gets into the NFL, we're managing his NFL career from a contractual standpoint, and that's really, really critical, of course. But, if you're blessed, you're going to negotiate a few contracts, and you could be preparing for that for months and months and months, yes. But more time is spent just on personal off-the-field things to help players navigate life. And sometimes it could just be rank and file, mundane type of task. But if we're removing hassles, if we're removing stress from a player's plate, and they could spend more time focused on their craft, watching films, sleeping, hydrating, doing the hyperbaric chamber, whatever it is they need to do to be better, we all benefit, and they know their business is being handled by guys that they trust and that have been there and done that. And for them, their families, because this is a family affair, it's business first. I think a player has to respect what an agent is bringing to the table from a business standpoint, or else why you're talking to that agent. But it's not a normal business that I'm in here, and so we obviously develop some pretty close, personal bonds with players, and those, to me, hopefully we want them to last a lifetime. This is not just like, hey, they're in the NFL and now you're out of the NFL, so we can't collect money from you anymore. Good luck. That's not how it goes. There's a reason why Tom Bahali and Dion Barnes and Robbie Gold and other retired players were at my daughter's wedding 3 months ago. It's because they're, part of the family, and they always will be, and they've seen my daughter grow up. And so, we wanted them there the way I would, any family member. So those are the kind of relationships that, are great, and that ideally I'm looking for when I sign a new player.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Robbie Gold. I did want to ask you about that. Shoot, he graduated from Penn State almost when I was born, I think, and just finished up his playing career recently. What was that process like for him, and for someone to be in the league for almost 20 years?
Those specialists, well, I'll tell you about, if you're asking me about Robbie's draft process, I don't know, because I was not his agent coming out of school. I didn't even recruit Robbie. Robbie wasn't drafted. Didn't recruit him at all. Robbie signed with another agent. As most people know, he wound up joining the Bears as an undrafted rookie free agent in like early October, mid-October of the NFL season. I didn't give it a second thought, but I had a client on the Bears, another great Penn Stater, Michael Haynes, who was a first-round draft pick in '03. And Michael said, hey, Robbie's not happy with his agent. I told him all about you. You should meet him. And because I'm so smart back then, kickers didn't make a lot of money. I said, Michael, what am I going to do with a kicker? Come on. Shows you how smart I am.
Yeah, right.
He said, you'll love him. He's a great guy. And man, Michael was right. Was Robbie a great guy? So, my partners and I signed Robbie right after his rookie year. And so we're with him for the last 17 years. He is just an unbelievable quality guy. He just recently retired, and those specialists, they can play a long time.
Yeah, you get some lengthy careers out of them. Robbie, I'm coming for you to get you on this podcast. If he's watching, I'm gonna get him on here for you guys.
We'll connect that. Robbie, I'm sure would love to do it. He's got, he's in the media himself. I mean, he's done a lot of media out in Chicago.
He's a head coach of a football team, right?
Believe it or not, talk about never saw that one coming. We talked a lot about. I mean, don't ask the different groundwork that's been laid for post-career for Robbie. High school football coach was not part of that groundwork. He pulled a fast one on us. We didn't know he was going to go that direction, but. He obviously loves it and wants to be around it. And, Lord knows he doesn't need the money. He is doing it for the love of the game and to help kids. And he's living a great life up in the suburbs of Chicago.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. He gets to give back and be a part of something like that. Because it is hard when you leave football. And I can speak to this. I think most guys that retired is that it is, no matter when you leave football, it is difficult to hang it up for good. I mean, you always most guys, that's why they gravitate, kind of back around football, whether it's being a coach or kind of in, personnel office or doing something. Me being, doing this, interviewing a bunch of football related people, it's fun to be around. It is contagious. But Jim, I wanted to get into and kind of give a look behind the scenes of the draft process for a player start to finish. And I know this will look a little different, whether you're going to more likely be undrafted or if you're going to be a first-round draft pick. But if you could just kind of give us from that, after that bowl game ends, until that day that you're drafted, let's go through that process a little bit, and I'll ask you some questions as we go.
For sure. I mean, it's arguably, and it sounds silly to say, but it might be the most 4 important months that a college player has to improve his draft stock, and that doesn't make sense when they have years of film of players, for example, here, playing against the top level of competition there could be, Big Ten football. And I've always said to people, great, you build up all this goodwill on the field, and then you're telling me, 4.8 seconds in a pair of shorts in Indianapolis in early March can undo all this? That's crazy. That doesn't make sense. I could do this 320 years, forget about 32 years, and I'll never understand it. But, it's a little bit more involved in that. But every piece of the draft process is so important, and that's why, as I was saying before, we want to surround our guys with the absolute best of resources, and it's why, guys like me are spending so much time and effort and energy and money on this postseason process, because every 100th of a second counts. And again, not to just overly focus on the 40, because it's every other drill, the shuttles and the vert and the broad and the position work, but it's so many other things. It's the interviews. It's the medical exams. You could set the combine speed record, but if you fail the physical, it doesn't matter. They're not going to draft you. Yeah. So that's part of it too, making sure our guys are healthy, and if there's any injury questions, making sure we're sending them to independent doctors so we can have reports and that can be presented to all of the doctors at the combine.
Right, yeah, because I've seen, and I don't think fans always hear about it, but there's some guys that perform really well, and it's like, this guy should be, first, second rounder, and then he goes in the 5th or 6th, and it's like, why did that happen? It's like, well, you didn't get to see his medical report where, his meniscus is pretty much all the way gone or something in his shoulder. I mean, that's a big reality. I've seen it. When the season ends and we're at the bowl game, the athletic trainer will walk around with a stack of papers. And sometimes some guys' stacks are about this big and sometimes they're this big. And he goes, here's your medical history. Hand that to anybody that asks for it, because you have to hand it over throughout the draft process. So it is, it can be lengthy for some guys, and it can harm them, their draft stock a little bit.
It's arguably the most important component of the combine, and most people, certainly your age, do not even realize that was the original purpose of the combine. It was just the gathering of the team doctors in the middle of the country and having the guys come in, because team doctors back in the 70s were flying all over the place trying to get physicals in their hands on these players. It wasn't about the 40, it wasn't about the bench, it wasn't a TV show, that's for sure. This is even before my time, but I know the history. This was about the medical, to be able to get medical evals on a large percentage of the college population all under one roof in the middle of the country. That's how it became in Indianapolis, and that's what the combine was before it turned into a track meet and a TV show and everything else that it's turned into.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a little bit different now. And, you know, you did mention, though, it is really interesting to see how someone's 40 time, especially if you're a speed position. It's a little bit different if you're a D-line, O-line. I don't think it matters as much. You kind of more look at the 10-yard split and things like that.
Yeah.
But if you're a wide receiver or a DB, I mean, and now if you're running in like the 4.5s, they're starting to drop you down the boards, man. I mean, no matter what else you do on the field.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, and every player feels he's going to do his personal best at the combine, and what they're not, fully realizing is just sort of the stress on the body, both physical and mental, being in that pressure-packed situation and being there for 4 days in advance of even running and maybe getting off your sleep schedule. And who knows, what type of roommate you might have at the combine. You might get lucky and have a solo room, and you're eating different food. And that's why these combine training facilities have taken over the last several years to setting up, big, hotel ballrooms where players can come in and get massaged and sort of, work on their starts and eat clean and all those types of things, because, it has taken on such importance. And yes, the combine is certainly the most important part of the pre-draft process, and that's what you were asking about, but it's not the only part. Obviously, the All-Star games are an important part of it as well, and performing similarly to the combine, not just how they do on the field, but how a player does in the interview room. And we always tell our guys, and we prepare them for interviews as in-depth as we can, every little nugget that we can get. They might meet some position coach at an All-Star game that has some connection to them in the past. Maybe they're from the same state or city, and if our client can sort of raise that and show that he's done a little bit of research and he's really treating the process as a job interview, that could go a long way. That scout or that position coach goes and tells the coordinator, who tells the head coach, who tells the GM, and now all of a sudden the player is being flown around in the month of April going on these official 30 visits. Caden had like 10, 11, 30 visits. He was a busy guy, flying all over the country and whatnot, with New England being one of them. And those visits are really where you hope they solidify their love. The team solidifies the love for the player and maybe reaches up a little bit higher than anyone thought to draft the guy.
Yeah, I was taught when Caden came to the spring game and he was on the sideline and he was telling me, he's like, man, I just got back from, I think, like San Fran. He's like, now I'm going up to New England and then I'm going down to, like Texas somewhere. I mean, they fly you all over, and it is day after day after day. So that is a kind of a rough process, but then you find your home and it is all good. But going back, when does that process start where so the guys go, and pretty much if you opt out of that bowl game, as soon as you opt out, you head to go train wherever you're going, Florida, Texas, Cali. When does that process start of where you're choosing that training facility before the combine, before the draft?
Completely up to the player. I mean, obviously we're here to provide information. We're familiar with all of the facilities, and ultimately it's up to the player where he wants to train. We'll make it happen. We have our opinions as to where we think some of the best places are, and some places we might feel are a really good fit for a player for one reason or another, but ultimately it's the player's decision, and he can decide months and months before he's ready to go, or he can decide the day before he's ready to go, and we can make it happen either way. But we're here to provide the information and certainly make the connection if they'd like to speak to the speed coach and the position coach and the doctors and the people that are scientists at these facilities, which they really are. So that's all part of what we're bringing to the table, and every player can have his own timetable as to how to pursue it. And you talked about, when they opt out from the bowl game, and not everybody opts out. Caden Wallace and Daquan Hardy, my two guys from this year's team, they both played in the Peach Bowl. And, right after New Year's, Day went down to Fort Lauderdale, Caden went out to Phoenix, and they both had, really good training experiences.
Yeah. I know that, and I don't know if all fans know this, but when you basically end that college football experience and you are no longer under the NCAA, you are allowed to basically be fronted some money from your agent to handle all the stuff you need to do. I don't know how much you guys take care of from where they're staying, but you need some money to go out, have a good time. You're going to live that NFL lifestyle shortly. So how do you decide? Is there like a cap on how much a person gets on, where they're projected in the draft? Like if you're a first round draft pick, do I get $500,000 to play with? And obviously this has to all be paid back to the agent. I mean, it's up front, and then they're getting paid back.
Not
But
necessarily true.
no.
No. I mean, if you're talking about what we would call a traditional stipend, which is additional expenses
Right.
that we will give to a player after he's done with his college playing career and he has signed a representation agreement with us, we're of course paying all of the hard expenses that the player has, being at the combine training facility and the lodging and the rental car and the food and the training and all those sorts of things. But above and beyond that, we are giving a monthly stipend because the player has other expenses. Gas for the rent-a-car, food to put in the refrigerator of where he's staying at the combine training facility, even though he's getting 3 meals a day. Player might need to be gaining weight and has to eat 5 times a day, and they might have bills back in State College, for example, to pay. So we are giving a monthly stipend, which is perfectly legal and with standard industry practice and whatnot. And no, it's not necessarily different based upon the projections of where a player might go, because frankly, projections on January 1 don't really mean anything. That's a big thing that I tell people with all the draft websites and everything that's out there on social media, especially the parents. I tell them, don't get too hung up on what you're reading about the projections and whatnot and rankings, because the only rankings in our mind that count is when the commissioner steps to the podium in late April, starts reading names. Those are the legitimate rankings. So don't believe everything that you read. But those stipends, that expense money that we are given, is part of our process and is not paid back by the clients, and we put that certainly in writing and whatnot.
Okay.
So, the monthly 4 months worth of stipend or expense money, whatever you want to call it, that's part of the deal and is not paid back.
Okay, and now is there some, let's say if you are a top 10 pick, is there agents that you've heard of that do that, where they say, hey, I want a bunch of money to use right now and I'll pay it back down the line? Is that a thing?
Well, the answer is it's definitely a thing, and a lot of times they don't pay it back. But, and this might surprise you in this world of NIL, that's still against the rules. That's still paying a player to sign with you. Offering a player a signing bonus to sign with you is still against NCAA rules. Does it happen in this business? Yes. It's not something that I've ever done, nor will I ever. I'd like to think maybe now that's a little bit less of an incentive, or takes on a little bit less importance to players in this new era of NIL, where players now have some money in their pockets where they didn't really have before. And I'm sort of hopeful that decisions now that players are making might be more based on who's the best agent. Who do I think can really help me throughout the rest of my, not just career, but like I said, the rest of my life after football? Not the guy that's going to break the rules and give me 50 grand to sign or whatever, because at the end of the day, that 50 grand is, really not going to be a difference maker for you in terms of the rest of your life. But an agent that is really connected and, experienced and has your back and has your best interests at heart and is willing to help you through the rest of your life, I'm going to argue could bring a whole lot more value than whatever illegal inducement another agent might be willing to still give a player. So I'm hopeful in this new environment, and that players have, we'll call it walking around money, a lot more than they used to. Hopefully those inducements are not as attractive to players as they have been for most of the years I've been doing this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. NIL has not only changed the game in college football, but even, like you said, moving forward into that. But I think there is kind of a risk. Like, you are risk takers. You're putting not only the stipend, but like you said, paying for the airfare, where they're living, their car, all that money, you're dumping that money to them, and they're not going to necessarily make it. It's not guaranteed. So, I mean, you guys are taking a big risk every time you sign a client.
100%. Every player with the hard expenses is a huge investment, and based upon how rookie contracts are, the reality is for us, similar to the player, we're not making the big money until a player gets to that second contract. Even a guy like Caden Wallace, the way the finances work between expenses and what we're earning from him in this first year, and he's an early third-round pick, not bad, 68th pick in the draft, we're going to be about even. We're going to break even after 1 year. So, and then don't forget, these players, they're making less money in years 2, 3, and 4 because they're not getting a signing bonus in years 2, 3, and 4. The rookie contract, the year that the player makes the most is year 1 because he's getting a signing bonus.
Right.
So, the numbers might not be where the general public thinks they really are for agents in terms of what we're earning, but that's okay. We're in this for the long haul. We play the long game with guys, and, sometimes you're blessed with a Tom Bahali and a Robbie Gold and a Donovan Smith and guys that make an awful lot of money. By the way, Robbie's number 5 or 6 on that all-time Penn State career earning list. So.
That's pretty for a kicker. That's pretty amazing to be that high up there.
Well, most people think it's crazy when I tell them these numbers because you think of some of the unbelievable guys that we, Kerry Collins and Keyjana Carter and LeVar and Courtney Brand and all these guys. But of course, the difference is that the money wasn't quite the same. Even though they were super high draft picks and they got paid second contract, it wasn't the same as what guys are earning, 15 years ago and 7 years ago and now. And so, that's why guys that are a little bit more recent from the last 15, 18 years are kind of high up on that list.
Yeah. All right, so I want to go back real quick. We were just talking about that process and kind of that initial process of going to where you're going to train. So let's say it is January, you arrive where you're going to train. Take me from there. You train for how long, and then maybe you play in some type of like senior ball?
You're training for 2 months, and the one break that you're taking from training is to go play in an all-star game, whether it's the Senior Bowl or the East-West Shrine game. There are a couple of other games out there, but those are certainly the 2 primary all-star games. So most players at these combine training facilities are leaving for just that one stretch in late January to go play in an all-star game. But otherwise, they're there for 2 months up until the time they leave for the combine. And again, it's such a scientific process, and there's so many staff members of these facilities, and we bring in outside people to help our guys prepare for all of this. And so, there's a laser focus on, yes, the combine, but also the all-star game. But then after the combine, those next 2 months are really important too. Most players will come back to their campus because they're not only preparing for Pro Day, which is coming up later in March, but also once the combine's done, NFL coaches can hit the road, and sometimes they show up unannounced on a college campus wanting to see a player. And so if that player's home or if that player went back to his combine facility, I'm not saying there's never times where a player goes back to his combine facility if he's still nursing through an injury and maybe couldn't run at the combine and wants another couple weeks of training before Pro Day. So there are times you can go back, but the majority of players go back to campus after the combine, and one of the reasons is to potentially have private workouts with NFL position coaches in the weeks before Pro Day and the weeks after Pro Day. And then after Pro Day is also some of those visits that we were talking about, called local days, as well as the official 30 visits. We were talking about Caden having a whole bunch of those visits, but now there's also these local day visits where, for example, players from this school can go, and the Ravens and the Steelers and the Eagles and the Jets and the Giants and the Bills and the Commanders will have a local day that players can go to, and not even to work out, but it's just another chance to Landon, you want to make them fall in love with you. Now that's what this is, and the more teams and the more people in the buildings of those teams that we can get fall in love with our clients, better shot we have of them getting drafted higher. So if we can put our guys in front of NFL personnel, that's what we're trying to do.
Campus Steaks is the official sponsor of the Behind the Wall podcast. Go check them out at Pew Street in downtown State College. They got the best cheesesteaks, french fries, onion rings, you name it, and they got it. It's a Philly thing. Come to the Student Bookstore downtown on College Ave. Whether you need a game day fit or you're just chilling in the crib, Student Bookstore has all your Penn State clothing needs. All right, we're back with Jim Ivler. Jim, so I know we talked about how stressful this process is for you and the draft process, but not only the whole year. But I want to ask, what's the most stressful day of the year for you, or moment of the year?
Sure, as you would imagine, the answer definitely is the draft and draft weekend, and kind of the way our calendar works, we look at it from draft to draft. It's such, of course, a critical part of a player's career, not only for the obvious reasons that you would think, of course, earning more money the higher you get drafted, but really the higher you get drafted, the more opportunity and time that buys you in the NFL. And to me, that's the real value. I've said to a lot of different people, the difference in money from a third rounder to a sixth rounder is nothing that's going to change anybody's life in the long run, but that third rounder is just naturally going to have a little bit more runway and leeway to succeed in the NFL. And sometimes guys need a couple of years until they're healthy, or they are in a system that's right, or get used to the speed of the whatever it is. So that's really why that draft is so critical.
That is something I wanted to ask you. So and I've talked about this before, I do think, though, so you get a lot more leeway of being able to mess up and not, perform as you should if you're a first-round draft pick because they invested that capital into you. But I do think there is something to be said for being that first-round pick for a team, and those expectations are put on you. Like, you need to perform, you're going to be the guy. Well, if you're a 6th or 7th round draft pick, you don't have that pressure. You're coming in, you're saying, hey, I'm betting on myself. This is me. I feel like you could play a little more looser. You have a chance to make almost a better impact because you're not expected to.
I think that some players could have that mindset, and I think that that's a great mindset. And I'd rather a player have that mindset if he's my client, rather than thinking, well, I don't have a lot of runway because I was a late rounder. And again, I mean, you got to put all this in perspective. There's about 255 guys drafted a year. If you are drafted, I don't care if you're the last pick in the draft, that's an amazing accomplishment. They're saying you're one of the top 250 something guys in the country. That is absolutely amazing. And so, but the reality is there's just less invested in that player, and it doesn't mean that player can't end up in the Hall of Fame. There's undrafted rookie free agents who are now in Canton. So, of course, it's still all about what you do when you get there, and even if you're undrafted, if they see you're a player and there's clearly a lot of talent and the right work ethic and attention to detail and wanting to perfect the craft, they'll give you that runway if they see all of those qualities. So it's still on you and what you do when you get there, but let's call it what it is. The name of the game is trying to get guys drafted as high as possible. And so, of course, that weekend is a super, super busy weekend, and we're working the phones, as you can imagine, and trying to get guys drafted as high as possible as it's even happening. And the last day, Saturday, and of course, you hope that all of your guys get drafted, but life happens. Sometimes players maybe can't perform in the postseason because of injury and whatnot, and so without verifiable numbers on the player, it's kind of hard to get drafted that way. And a player might have a lot of opportunities to sign as an undrafted rookie free agent, and the key at that point in time, and that is the busiest time, if you have 20 teams calling you at once towards the end of the draft trying to sign a player, making the decision as to where is the best place for that player to sign is hectic, and it can be stressful, and it's much more about the opportunity that player is going to be given than any signing bonus that we're going to negotiate for him.
When the draft ends, I'm sure there's tons of teams calling, because it's total chaos when the draft ends, and there's tons of guys. I think most teams, they could pick up like 8 to 10 undrafted free agents. That's 32 teams. I'd imagine you get some calls you get multiple calls on your phone at 1 minute. I'm sure you might be talking to the Chiefs. You look and the Buccaneers are there, and then you get another call. That's got to be pretty hectic.
It's beyond hectic. Like I said, there've been times where there could be 20 teams calling, and you got to realize that this is happening during the draft. So if you have a guy that's in demand, really the right way to go about the process is having an agreement in principle in place with a team long before the draft is over. Of course, with the understanding that if some other team drafts the player, well, then that agreement is no more because the guy got drafted. And so, because if you wait, and I'm talking just a couple minutes after the last pick is read, you could lose that opportunity because they're going to the next guy on their list. Right. The teams are. And so, it could be really hectic. And, if you're having these conversations with teams, you want to have a deal worked out with the team, and then you hope that player does get drafted before he ever signs a deal with that team.
Right, absolutely, yeah. I'm sure you have great relationships with a lot of these GMs, but I did want to ask, what's the best negotiating GM that you've dealt with? Because there's some good ones in the league, but is there a GM it's always hard for you to get it your way, and they are really good at making sure they got the deal how they want it?
Well, I'm sure you don't think I'm crazy enough to talk about a current general manager,
no.
good or bad. I'm not going to do that. But going back in the day, I'm going to say that really one of my favorite guys was Mike Tannenbaum, who is certainly now a well-known media figure and just a really great guy and a smart guy, and was the general manager of the Jets for a nice stretch. And we're based in New York City, so we got a chance to, we know Mike a long time and see him, and we negotiated a lot of deals with Mike, and always enjoyed the back and forth with him, and he was always a great professional and a great guy to deal with. And we had some New York Jets, which is great. Us being in New York City with two teams there, we get to see a lot of clients, not just the guys, of course, that are on those two teams, but anytime a team during the season comes in to play the Jets or Giants, it's our backyard. So get to see a lot of guys in the New York area. So one of the benefits to where we are.
Yeah, smart on his job, not to mention any current guys.
No shot.
That's a good plan. You don't want to ruffle any feathers. I want to transition into NIL, because you do a little bit of NIL work, and you've done some stuff with Penn State guys. But big news that just came down is the settlement. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that and what that kind of looks like now. It is a constantly changing college football world, but can you give us a little bit of an idea of where you think this is headed with the kind of the things that came down in this settlement?
Sure, and anyone who tells you with any level of confidence what it looks like is just talking to be heard,
Yeah.
because it's changing every day, even after some settlement that's apparently been reached between the
Mm,
parties. But of course, the Northern District of California still has not ratified that settlement. They're still got to go in front of them for the next month or two, and I know that there are still a lot of details to be worked out. But the framework of what they are attempting to do is have a structure where there is, we're not going to call it a salary because they're still not looking to make college athletes employees, that's for sure. But a structure to where money is divided up between the athletes and it's revenue sharing,
mm,
and it's coming from revenues that the colleges are generating. But there's going to be a lot of discretion up to the colleges how to split that revenue amongst not just the players on the football team, but all sports. And that's going to lead, I'm sure, to a lot of tough conversations. And so there are so many moving parts of this. And because there are so many details yet to be worked out, they've
mm,
certainly already announced that this is not going to be implemented until the 25-26
mm.
academic year, because the details need to be worked out and approved. And then there's still going to be, hopefully, some federal guidelines that might come down reinforcing whatever this settlement is if it is approved, and also giving them antitrust exemption, because
Mm.
there's, they don't want to have come a settlement and then just have more lawsuits. So they're looking to
Right.
take care of a lot of things, under the umbrella of one settlement.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, just because there is so much that's going on within that settlement, and like you said, it is constantly changing the world of NIL. I mean, I'm sure when you first heard about NIL to now where we sit, I mean, did you think that it was going to be this crazy and just always just changing, or did you kind of expect it to go a certain way? I mean, no one could really say how they predicted it, but
Well, knowing the business, I certainly thought it was going to turn into a pay for play, which
mm,
it in effect has,
yeah.
as much as they spoke about not wanting it to be that. Let's call it what it is. And that's why they need these new guidelines, and that's
Hmm.
why they need a settlement, and to make it more official pay to play. And that doesn't mean that the NIL is going to go away, because, of course, whatever the settlement is that's reached and whatever the details are and however much money athletes get, they're still going to be able to pursue other NIL deals. And
Sure.
so but the day-to-day change that has happened since July 1 of 2021 is almost beyond comprehension. The different people that have entered the ecosystem now because of what NIL has brought to the table, it's certainly the largest, fundamental and dynamic shift
Mm,
within the business that I've ever seen, for sure. And great thing for players, of course, and the ability to now monetize their name, image, and likeness. But I don't think anyone could have predicted all of the various consequences and things that have gone on, and it's so touchy with so many different people, and but at the end of the day, players are obviously benefiting. And you add the transfer portal rules, the new
mm.
transfer portal rules. So, as we now say in the office, NIL plus transfer portal basically equals unrestricted free agency.
Exactly.
And I don't
That's
think
pretty.
anybody intended that with college sports. And, I don't think anybody would say that's really a great thing, but, I get it. Sometimes there are monetary reasons that some players just might not want to pass up because they don't know what the future holds. So,
Yeah.
but it also makes roster building a little bit of a challenge
It
in
does.
this era, in any sport, not just football.
Yeah, you're a little bit of more of a GM now. I mean, you are building a roster, and that's kind of what happened with Tennessee when the NCAA basically said, "Hey, you're in trouble. You are not allowed to be meeting with NIL collectives and telling players how much they're going to make before they get here." And they're like, "Nah, we can do that. That should be completely legal." And that's kind of what blew this open. And I just talked about this, but you think about it. You go to a job offer, and they say, "Okay, we want to sign you. Let's sign the contract." You say, "Wait, I don't see any money on here yet." They say, "No, we're not going to tell you how much you get until you sign." I'm not signing up for that job. I don't know about you, but that's not a good job in my book. So it makes sense. There are some logistics that should be able to be talked about beforehand. But I think something that's going to be really interesting to see is how they handle. There's a lot of Title IX stuff that you have to handle. You have to make sure there's a lot of stuff that has to be equal. So I don't know how they're going to go about that. But think about Penn State. We have 31 varsity sports. Alabama, Auburn, I mean, they have like 15, 16. So you could also see the cutting of some varsity sports coming. I mean, there is going to be a lot changing in the dynamic of not even just college football, but college athletics in general.
That is 100% coming. I certainly hope it's not coming here at Penn State. I'd hate to see any of the athletic teams cut, but there's no doubt that that's going to be a consequence around the country. There's going to be some sports that are just cut. Yes, they have to stay within the framework of Title IX as they should, but that's definitely coming. And yes, for the schools that have a large number of intercollegiate athletic programs, there's going to be some real hard decisions to be made.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Jim Ivler, one of the best in the business. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and I could say the same right back at you. Talk about an emerging star right here.
Thank you.